And good morning. Glad you're with us this morning here with Pat McGuigan, as we are every Saturday morning, talking mostly local politics, and we'll do that this time as well. And local issues outside of the political realm, although this will get political, is how to handle our economy. And there are recent reports out showing we are in for a rough stretch, as if we haven't been already, but it looks like it'll continue.
I think there's pretty much a consensus that something that Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels said about a year and a half ago has become conventional wisdom. It wasn't at the time. But in the midst of the recession, before it was declared over, he said it would take years for state governments to recover. He was pointing specifically to his own state of Indiana, but he felt that was going to be true nationwide. And it's proved to be prophetic. Mm-hmm. The situation we're in, Oklahoma Policy Insitute, for example, a progressive think tank here in Oklahoma, very credible guys, they have done an analysis saying it's probably 2014 before your overall tax base recovers to pre-recession levels. And then they go on to recommend some policy ideas, including not doing the next stage of a potential income tax cut. Now that may become a debatable proposition, right, but their basic presentation of economic dynamics seems pretty credible. The National Association of State Budget Officers, which Scott Meacham's been very involved in, a mainstream national group, in conjunction with the National Governors Association, released their report saying pretty much the same thing. It's going to be a while. The thing they point to is, although there's recovery year over year, in other words, this year is going better than last year, you don't have the federal stimulus money lying around in the states to close some of the spending gap. And I could go on. The Mercatus Center out of Virginia did a critical analysis saying the problem with federal matches is that when a state takes a federal match in order to do something that most people think is a good policy in, that you're building in long-term spending, and that in turn then accounts for some of the existing gap.
It's one of the big worries about getting the stimulus money.
That's exactly right. How much are you using it for retaining existing spending, and how much are you doing new stuff that then becomes existing spending? Now, leavening the dough a little bit, stateline.org has a new analysis out showing several consecutive straight months of increased sales tax revenue growth in Oklahoma, and that builds into those numbers. So the overall picture is cautiously optimistic for the long term, but continuing to be very challenged in the short term. This is why you have the governor of Wisconsin, incoming governor of Wisconsin, saying things like, you know, except for prisons, everything's on the table. We might privatize big chunks of state government. That's what's going on in Wisconsin in the discussion. The people blame, in Oklahoma, according to the Sooner poll, the people blame the politicians for government being a little too big. And then further, they're supportive, according to the Sooner poll, of budget cuts rather than increased revenue. So, interesting time is laid out. The Republicans sort of like, be careful what you wish for. Now this is the Republicans' government starting.
You've got to govern right now. And speaking of which, you sat down with the governor-elect, Mary Fallin, recently and kind of got her take on the situation and what she wants to do.
Yeah, it was a good interview late last week, right after she got back from Washington. And she said, leave the trigger in place. If we reach a certain level, 4%, if I remember right, 4% of growth year over year in the income tax base, then let that next modest cut go in from 5.5, I think, to 5.25 being the top end levy. Then she went on to say, in the context of social programs and people helping each other in voluntary efforts, she said the reason these are so important is that inevitably there are going to be further budget cuts. So pro-tax cuts, also saying there's going to be spending cuts. She was concerned, it seemed like to me, about things she's hearing from business leaders about a relatively flat economy in real estate, and that the recovery is not nearly as robust as we're used to in past recessions. None of this is particularly shocking, but she said it, and it leads her to these conclusions that we need to stimulate, not with government money, but through the private sector, and we need to further discipline or right-size government. So she's sticking to her guns.
Well, it's interesting. She says she wants to make Oklahoma more business friendly, and we've already been rated as a very business friendly state, but
Yeah.
she wants to make it more so.
Yeah, and again, you have to remember where we start. You know, Oklahoma in most indices of economic vibrancy and growth falls at the bottom end. A lot of people often point to the other side of that, which is a consequence of our comparative poverty. So the question becomes, how do you grow an economy and make a state richer so that there's no more money in the private sector available to be taxed and to be contributed to worthy causes? And Oklahomans are very generous. The data also shows that. So what you get to at the end of the day is an argument that goes back into the mists of time in American history, is what's the best way to address social, cultural, and economic problems. And Fallin falls in the tradition of Reagan and John F. Kennedy, for that example, which before Reagan, the last major income tax cut in American history had been under John F. Kennedy, who used the analogy of a rising tide lifting all boats. We're in very challenging times, though, because of the global economy and competition. So this will be a very challenging legislative session, full of a lot of arguments, and you're going to see a lot of Republicans put in a difficult position of deciding exactly what to cut.
Speaking of challenges, a number of school districts challenging this law and not doing what many believe they should be doing in terms of taking care of special needs students in this state.
Yeah, this is going to be an issue that will continue to evolve, and you might see see some moves to try to act as a corrective to the 6 districts, very important, significant, large districts that are not only dragging their feet, but under advice of their legal counsel actually opposing implementation of the new special needs law, the Henry Scholarship Program. Not sure where that will turn out. One of the things that we've done at CapitolBeatOK is done some investigating of potential avenues short of litigation or beyond litigation or besides litigation of implementation of that. There's a structure in federal civil rights law under education provisions. 2 of 5 of the federal civil rights laws that relate to education apply specifically to children with disabilities. And the question becomes, even though federal money is not entangled, if a benefit is granted by government and that benefit is then withheld through state action, is there a basis for a civil rights complaint? The question hasn't been joined yet, either in litigation or through a civil rights complaint. But we were able to talk to a federal official in the region who confirmed, you know, that those provisions are there, explained them a little bit, and didn't reach any conclusion about what that might mean for Oklahoma law. So you just add that into the mix of an area that's new in state policy and could become the basis for quite a bit of disagreement, or perhaps a new era in broadening the reach of those programs to help more kids.
Something to watch, and I knew you.
Oh, along with everything else.
That's right. All right, well, you can read more about all these topics on Pat's blog. It's CapitolBeatOK.com. Thanks for watching this morning. We'll see you next week.